If there is one moment in a woman's life where illusion speaks louder than truth, it is the silence right after intimacy. That quiet space where your mind begins to race, searching his breathing, his body language, his distance or closeness for meaning. In that moment, most women unknowingly tell themselves a story, one shaped by movies, romance novels, and whispered advice from friends. A story where intimacy magically binds two souls, where closeness equals commitment, where sex is the doorway to emotional certainty. And yet, if you have ever felt confused, disappointed, or suddenly invisible after that moment, it is not because you imagined it wrong. It is because you were never told the truth. After decades of listening to women's heartbreak and men's unspoken psychology, there is one reality that consistently shocks people when they finally understand it. What goes on in a man's mind after intimacy is not romantic, not cruel, and not personal, but it is deeply revealing. And once you see it clearly, you will never approach intimacy the same way again. The greatest mistake women make is assuming that men process intimacy the way women do. That after sex, he lies there emotionally opened, evaluating feelings, imagining futures, sensing connection. This is not because women are foolish. It is because female emotional wiring naturally links intimacy with bonding. For many women, sex is not an isolated act. It is an emotional amplifier. But the male brain does not operate under that same architecture, especially in the immediate aftermath. Biology takes control long before emotion has a voice. The male nervous system, moments after orgasm, enters a shutdown phase governed by prolactin, a hormone that surges dramatically and induces a state of calm, detachment, and physiological satisfaction. This is not disinterest. It is not regret. It is not rejection. It is chemistry. His body is doing what it is designed to do: rest, reset, withdraw inward. That is why many men fall silent, become distant, or even fall asleep. And if you interpret that silence as emotional absence, you are already stepping into the trap. But here is where the story becomes more complex and far more important. While his conscious mind is quiet, something else is very active. His subconscious is evaluating, not your body, not your performance, not the intensity of the act itself. It is evaluating something far more subtle and far more decisive: your emotional posture after intimacy. Men do not consciously sit there asking themselves if they love you. Instead, their primitive brain scans for signals. Has something changed? Has the dynamic shifted? Has the woman in front of me become emotionally different now that intimacy has happened? This evaluation happens silently, instinctively, and without words, but it shapes his future behavior more than any conversation ever could. This is where many women unknowingly sabotage themselves, not because they did anything wrong, but because they acted from emotional vulnerability rather than emotional sovereignty. When intimacy becomes a turning point where you suddenly seek reassurance, closeness, future promises, or validation, the male subconscious registers a shift. And that shift is interpreted as emotional dependence, not emotional depth. The tragedy is that most women believe they are expressing love, openness, or honesty in those moments. But what the male psyche perceives is something else entirely. It perceives a collapse of emotional center, a movement from wholeness into need. And evolutionary psychology has taught men, long before logic or empathy can intervene, to pull away from emotional neediness, even when they do not understand why. This is why some men grow distant after intimacy despite enjoying it. Not because the connection was meaningless, but because it suddenly felt heavy. Not because you became less valuable, but because the dynamic shifted from mutual desire to unspoken obligation. His nervous system responds to that pressure long before his heart can interpret it. And here is the uncomfortable truth most people avoid saying out loud. Men are drawn not to women who give themselves, but to women who remain themselves. A woman's value is not diminished by intimacy, but it can be obscured if intimacy becomes a transaction for security or belonging. What creates attraction after sex is not closeness, but consistency. The man who becomes more interested after intimacy does so because the woman he encounters afterward is emotionally identical to the woman he desired before. She does not shrink. She does not cling. She does not seek confirmation that she matters. She already knows she does. This does not mean becoming cold or distant. Emotional autonomy is not emotional withdrawal. It is the ability to remain warm without grasping, open without leaning, affectionate without collapsing inward. An emotionally autonomous woman enjoys intimacy without turning it into a referendum on her worth, and this distinction changes everything. Because men do process intimacy emotionally, but not immediately and not verbally. Their emotional integration happens later, often 12 to 24 hours afterward, once their nervous system stabilizes. In that delayed window, the memory of the experience resurfaces, not as physical pleasure, but as emotional impression. And the quality of that impression depends entirely on how safe, respected, and unpressured they felt in your presence after intimacy. If a man senses that you did not need him to feel whole, but chose him freely, his respect deepens. If he senses that intimacy did not bind you emotionally or alter your self-concept, his curiosity grows. If he experiences you as grounded, fulfilled, and unchanged, his subconscious marks the experience as valuable and worth repeating. But if he senses that sex became leverage, expectation, or emotional currency, his nervous system records it as risk, not consciously, instinctively. This is why intimacy does not create attachment in men the way it does in women. What creates attachment in men is respect. And respect is born when a woman demonstrates that intimacy is an expression of her fullness, not a solution to her loneliness. The most unforgettable women are not those who give the most, but those who remain centered in moments of vulnerability. They do not ask intimacy to prove anything. They do not seek reassurance in the silence afterward. They allow space, they allow mystery, and they allow the man to come toward them emotionally rather than chasing him in the fragile aftermath. This is not a strategy. It is not manipulation. It is alignment with truth. And once you understand this, intimacy stops being a gamble and becomes a choice made from strength, not fear. One of the most misunderstood dynamics between men and women is the illusion of simultaneity, the belief that two people experience the same emotional moment at the same time. Nowhere is this illusion more destructive than after intimacy. Women often expect emotional clarity immediately, words, closeness, reassurance, or a visible shift toward attachment. Men, however, enter a completely different psychological terrain, and when these two inner timelines collide, confusion is born. After intimacy, a man is not emotionally empty, but he is neurologically occupied. His brain is recalibrating. Dopamine, which fueled desire and arousal, drops sharply. Oxytocin does not surge in the same way it does for women. Instead, his system prioritizes restoration and integration. This phase can feel like emotional distance to a woman who is wired to process connection through closeness. But distance does not mean detachment. It means digestion. During this integration phase, something critical happens beneath the surface. His subconscious begins what could be called emotional archiving. The experience is categorized, not intellectually, not romantically, but instinctively. Was this encounter safe or demanding, expansive or heavy, free or binding? And most importantly, did the woman remain herself, or did she emotionally transform afterward? This is where patterns repeat in countless relationships without either person understanding why. A woman may feel closer after intimacy and naturally express that closeness. A man may feel pressure without being able to name it. And pressure, even unspoken, is interpreted by the male nervous system as a threat to autonomy. Not because men fear intimacy, but because they fear emotional obligation that precedes emotional readiness. Men do not pull away from love. They pull away from emotional acceleration they did not consent to. What many women interpret as vulnerability, seeking reassurance, asking what this means, subtly testing his intentions, registers in his subconscious as a shift in power dynamics. Before intimacy, desire was mutual and free. Afterward, if the emotional center tilts, desire becomes responsibility. And desire cannot survive where obligation dominates. This does not mean a woman should suppress emotion or pretend indifference. It means emotion must be anchored, not projected. Emotional maturity after intimacy is not silence, it is stability. It is the ability to remain open without demanding reciprocity, to feel deeply without asking the other person to immediately meet you at the same depth. The women men remember most vividly are not those who demanded emotional presence, but those who allowed emotional space. Space is not absence, space is permission. Permission for his emotions to arrive in their own time, without pressure, without expectation, without fear of disappointing you. And here lies a paradox few people talk about. The very behavior women use to secure closeness after intimacy often delays or destroys it, because men do not fall in love through pursuit, they fall in love through recognition. Recognition of value, recognition of consistency, recognition of a woman who does not need to be chosen to know she is worthy. A man's emotional attachment does not ignite in the moment of sex. It ignites later when the memory of the experience resurfaces and is associated with calm, respect, and emotional safety. That association is only possible if nothing emotionally destabilizing happened immediately afterward. This is why some men seem more affectionate the next day. Their emotions did not vanish. They matured. They settled. They arrived once the nervous system felt safe enough to process them. But when that space is crowded by neediness, anxiety, or expectation, the emotional process is interrupted. His system chooses retreat, not because he lacks feeling, but because the environment feels demanding. Understanding this requires releasing a deeply ingrained belief that intimacy creates entitlement. It does not. Intimacy creates opportunity. Opportunity for connection, for depth, for bonding, but only if both nervous systems feel free. When a woman's mood, sense of worth, or emotional stability hinges on a man's behavior after sex, the subconscious message is clear. You are now responsible for how I feel. And no one, regardless of gender, thrives under that weight. The most powerful emotional signal you can send after intimacy is not desire. It is wholeness. A woman who returns to herself after sex, her rhythm, her interests, her grounded presence communicates something profoundly attractive. She signals that intimacy did not consume her, define her, or destabilize her. She remains centered, and that center becomes magnetic. Men are instinctively drawn to women who feel like an expansion, not an obligation. Women who add to their lives rather than silently asking to be carried. This is not about dominance or detachment. It is about emotional sovereignty, and sovereignty is deeply erotic. Because when a man senses that you choose him rather than need him, something fundamental shifts. Choice implies abundance, need implies scarcity, and scarcity repels long-term desire. There's another uncomfortable truth hidden here. Many women unconsciously use intimacy as a bridge to emotional security. Sex becomes a way to accelerate closeness, to anchor the bond, to reduce uncertainty. But uncertainty is not the enemy of love. It is the birthplace of desire. Men do not bond through certainty. They bond through curiosity, through the unfolding of discovery, through the sense that the woman in front of them cannot be fully possessed, predicted, or emotionally owned. This does not mean withholding. It means remaining complex, alive, and internally fulfilled. A woman who wakes up the morning after intimacy and continues her life, not as avoidance but as authenticity, sends a powerful signal. This experience was meaningful, but it did not replace my life. That message does not push a man away. It invites him closer. Because the male psyche is wired to value what it must approach, not what approaches it out of fear of loss. And this is why emotional autonomy after intimacy is not coldness. It is courage. The courage to trust that if connection is real, it does not need to be forced. The courage to let desire grow instead of suffocating it with reassurance seeking. The courage to remain whole in moments where many collapse inward. When a woman learns this, intimacy stops being a moment of anxiety and becomes a moment of quiet power. A power that does not demand, does not chase, does not plead, but simply is. And that presence, more than any technique or strategy, is what lingers in a man's mind long after the moment has passed. There is a question many women quietly carry but rarely dare to ask out loud. Why is it that some men, even after time has passed, even after distance or separation, cannot truly forget certain women, while others, despite effort, beauty, or devotion, fade almost instantly from memory? The answer has little to do with sex itself, and almost everything to do with what happened emotionally around it. The male brain does not store intimate experiences as isolated events. It stores them as emotional patterns. And when an experience disrupts expectation in a meaningful way, it leaves a mark that is unusually deep. Neuroscience calls this enhanced memory consolidation. In simpler terms, the brain remembers what does not fit the template. Most men unconsciously expect a woman to emotionally attach after intimacy. They expect a shift, more need, more availability, more emotional dependence. When that expectation is fulfilled, the experience is categorized as familiar. Pleasant, perhaps, but ordinary. When that expectation is broken, not through coldness, but through emotional stability, the experience becomes extraordinary. This is where the concept of the unforgettable woman begins. An unforgettable woman is not one who withholds affection or plays games. She is one who remains internally consistent. She does not collapse into intimacy, nor does she weaponize it. She allows closeness without surrendering her center. And that balance creates a psychological anomaly the male brain cannot easily resolve. When a man experiences deep physical intimacy with a woman who remains sovereign afterward, his nervous system enters a state of cognitive dissonance. Something does not align with his unconscious expectations. There is pleasure without possession, closeness without dependency, warmth without emotional demand. His brain returns to this unresolved experience again and again, attempting to understand it. That is why some men feel drawn back to certain women without being able to explain why. It is not obsession in the dramatic sense. It is imprinting. Imprinting occurs when pleasure is combined with respect, admiration, and emotional challenge. Not challenge as conflict, but challenge as depth. The woman who leaves such an imprint does not seek to be unforgettable. She simply refuses to abandon herself. There is a subtle but crucial distinction here that many misunderstand. Mystery is not secrecy. Mystery is depth that unfolds slowly. A woman who reveals everything, emotionally and psychologically, immediately after intimacy becomes transparent, predictable, safe but not compelling. A woman who remains emotionally present yet internally layered invites curiosity, and curiosity is the engine of male attachment. Men are not drawn to what they fully understand. They are drawn to what they sense they could continue discovering. This does not mean emotional unavailability. Emotional availability is openness rooted in self-trust. Emotional neediness is openness rooted in fear. Men can sense the difference instantly, even if they cannot articulate it. Their bodies respond before their minds do. A woman who seeks reassurance after intimacy sends a signal of uncertainty about her own value. A woman who remains calm, grounded, and self-directed communicates certainty without saying a word. And certainty is magnetic. This is why men often grow more attached to women who do not rearrange their lives around them after intimacy. Women who do not cancel plans, abandon routines, or emotionally orbit them. Not because men want distance, but because they respect autonomy. Autonomy signals abundance, and abundance creates desire. There is a neurochemical reason behind this. Dopamine, the hormone of pursuit and reward, is released most strongly in response to intermittent reinforcement. Not chaos, not inconsistency, but healthy unpredictability. When a man cannot fully predict a woman's emotional availability, but consistently experiences her as high quality, his dopamine system remains engaged. If, after intimacy, a woman becomes fully available, always responsive, always waiting, his dopamine response diminishes. The reward becomes guaranteed, and guaranteed rewards lose their power. But here's where many women misunderstand and overcorrect. They confuse autonomy with emotional withdrawal. They become distant, cold, or performative. This creates confusion, not attraction. True autonomy is not detachment. It is presence without dependency. An autonomous woman can be affectionate, warm, and engaged without needing the interaction to stabilize her sense of self. Her affection flows from fullness, not fear, from choice, not anxiety. Men feel this difference viscerally. Another element that makes a woman unforgettable is emotional consistency. If a man experiences a woman as confident, playful, intelligent, and alive before intimacy, and then encounters insecurity, anxiety, or emotional volatility afterward, his nervous system registers incongruence. Incongruence creates discomfort, but when a woman remains the same woman, centered, curious, self-respecting, through vulnerability, trust deepens. Trust not as commitment, but as emotional safety. And emotional safety is what allows men to attach without feeling trapped. This is why some men become more emotionally open days after intimacy rather than immediately. Their attachment grows not in the moment, but in reflection, in memory, in the quiet realization that the woman they experienced did not need to hold on to them to remain whole. That realization is powerful because it confronts a man with something rare, a woman who chooses him freely. And choice is far more intoxicating than obligation. Men are instinctively drawn to women who feel like an expansion of their world, not a narrowing of it. women who inspire growth rather than demand reassurance, women who do not ask to be completed but invite companionship. This is why unforgettable women often seem effortless, not because they are trying less, but because they are carrying less fear. Fear is heavy. It seeps into tone, timing, questions, and expectations. Fear makes intimacy transactional. It turns closeness into leverage, and leverage erodes respect. The woman who is remembered is not the one who tried hardest to be loved. She is the one who remained deeply herself in moments where many abandon their center. She did not rush meaning. She did not demand clarity. She allowed space for desire to evolve. And that patience, grounded in self-worth rather than strategy, is what makes her echo in the male psyche long after the encounter has passed. There is a line so thin that most people cross it without ever realizing it exists. A line between being emotionally compelling and being emotionally exhausting, between depth and drama, between mystery and chaos. And this line is precisely where many women lose the very attraction they are trying to preserve. Men do not become deeply attached to complexity. They become attached to coherence. This truth alone dismantles one of the most damaging myths in modern dating, the idea that emotional intensity equals emotional value. It does not. Intensity without inner stability does not create desire. It creates fatigue. And the male nervous system is exquisitely sensitive to this distinction. A high-value woman is not one who is difficult, unpredictable, or emotionally turbulent. She is one who is internally anchored. Her emotions move, but they do not dominate her. Her vulnerability exists, but it does not control her behavior. She can feel deeply without demanding others to manage those feelings for her. A toxically complicated woman, on the other hand, mistakes emotional volatility for depth. She oscillates between closeness and withdrawal, not from autonomy, but from unresolved fear. Her unpredictability is not intriguing, it is destabilizing. And while such dynamics can spark short-term intensity, they erode long-term desire. Men may chase chaos briefly, but they commit to clarity. This is why men often feel magnetically drawn to women who seem calm even in emotional moments. Calm is not indifference. Calm is self-regulation. It signals emotional maturity. It tells the male psyche, this woman can hold herself. And a woman who can hold herself does not require holding at all times. One of the most powerful yet overlooked factors in male attachment is personal growth. Men bond most deeply not to women who need them, but to women who make them better. Not through pressure, but through presence. When a man feels more grounded, more focused, more expansive in the presence of a woman, his brain categorizes her as valuable beyond pleasure. She becomes associated with elevation. And elevation is addictive. This is why men rarely forget women who respected themselves even in moments of vulnerability. Respect creates a psychological mirror. When a woman respects herself, a man is forced to confront his own standards. He rises or retreats, but he does not remain unchanged. This is the essence of the emotional imprint. Women who leave such imprints do not attempt to secure men through sacrifice. They do not trade intimacy for reassurance. They do not use sex to negotiate commitment. They allow men to step into connection voluntarily, without coercion. And here lies a profound paradox. Men feel most important to women who do not need them. Importance arises not from being required, but from being chosen. When a woman's happiness does not depend on a man, but she still chooses him, that choice carries weight. It implies freedom, and freedom is the foundation of authentic desire. Neuroscience supports this more than people realize. Experiences associated with autonomy, respect, and admiration activate the same neural pathways as personal achievement. A man remembers such experiences not as dependency, but as accomplishment, not as obligation, but as privilege. This is why some men recall certain women with reverence, even years later. Not because those women gave more, but because they demanded nothing while remaining fully present. But this presence requires courage. The courage to resist using intimacy as proof of worth. The courage to let uncertainty exist without rushing to eliminate it. The courage to trust that if connection is real, it will deepen without force. Many women unconsciously sabotage this process by seeking certainty too early. They ask questions not from curiosity, but from fear. They look for signs not to understand, but to reassure. And reassurance seeking subtly communicates self-doubt. Men sense self-doubt as emotional gravity. It pulls, it weighs, and eventually it repels. This does not mean never expressing emotion or desire. It means expressing from fullness rather than lack, saying, I enjoyed this, rather than what does this mean, feeling connection without demanding definition. The woman who remains unforgettable is not the one who tries to be irreplaceable. She is the one who remains irreplaceably herself. She does not inflate her value through performance. She protects it through consistency. Her standards are quiet but firm. Her boundaries are natural, not defensive. She does not over-explain or overextend. And because of this, men do something unexpected. They lean in. They lean in because they sense depth without danger, warmth without pressure, desire without demand. This is the environment where male attachment flourishes, not in urgency, not in emotional bargaining, but in spaciousness. The woman who understands this stops trying to control outcomes. She understands that attraction is not maintained through effort, but through alignment. She aligns with her own center, and others adjust accordingly. And when a man steps closer in such a dynamic, it is not because he was pulled, but because he was invited. There comes a moment in every woman's life when she must confront a truth that quietly governs all her relationships, a truth that, once seen clearly, cannot be unseen. That truth is this: intimacy never determines your value. It only reveals the relationship you already have with yourself. Most heartbreak does not come from men leaving. It comes from women abandoning themselves in the hope that closeness will secure love. It comes from believing that giving more will make someone stay, from confusing vulnerability with self-erasure, and from mistaking emotional intensity for emotional truth. The final secret about what men feel and think after intimacy is not really about men at all. It is about how a woman positions herself in the space that follows, that quiet, unguarded moment when nothing is promised, nothing is defined, and everything is revealed. Men do not remember women who try to be loved. They remember women who know they are. They remember the woman who did not ask intimacy to rescue her from loneliness, the woman who did not treat sex as a turning point that suddenly made her smaller, more anxious, more dependent. They remember the woman who remained steady in her worth, regardless of his response. Because in that steadiness, something rare is communicated: self-respect. Respect is the foundation of lasting attraction. Without it, desire decays into guilt, obligation, or habit. With it, love has room to breathe. And men, perhaps more than they realize, fall in love through respect long before they fall in love through emotion. This is why men can walk away from women who adore them but remain haunted by women who never needed them to feel whole. Not because those women were unavailable, but because they were complete. A complete woman does not withhold love. She offers it freely, without attachment to outcome. She does not use intimacy to negotiate commitment. She allows connection to grow at its natural pace, and in doing so, she creates a space where desire is voluntary, not coerced. Men sense this immediately. Their nervous systems relax in the presence of a woman who is not silently asking to be chosen. In that relaxation, curiosity emerges, and curiosity is the beginning of attachment. The most profound shift happens when a woman understands that her emotional stability after intimacy is not for his comfort, but for her integrity. When she realizes that remaining grounded is not a tactic but a form of self-loyalty, at that point she stops asking the wrong questions. She stops wondering, what is he thinking, and begins asking, how am I treating myself in this moment? She stops monitoring his behavior and starts honoring her own boundaries. And something remarkable happens. Men lean in toward women who do not lean away from themselves. This is not because men want control or distance. It is because emotional autonomy feels safe. It feels clean. It feels adult. And adults are drawn to other adults, not emotionally dependent children disguised as lovers. When a woman understands this, intimacy stops being dangerous territory. It becomes a shared experience, not a test. A moment of pleasure, not a referendum on her worth. She no longer needs reassurance after closeness. She knows that if connection is real, it will return. And if it does not, nothing has been lost, because she never lost herself. That is the quiet power of self-respect. It allows love to come without desperation and leave without devastation. Men do fall in love after intimacy, but they fall in love with the woman they observe afterward, the woman who remains consistent. The woman whose standards do not collapse. The woman whose life does not pause waiting for validation. They fall in love with the woman who chooses them, not the woman who needs them. This distinction changes everything. A woman who loves from freedom creates devotion. A woman who loves from fear creates withdrawal, not because she is unworthy, but because fear contaminates intimacy with urgency, and urgency suffocates desire. The final lesson is not about timing, technique, or behavior. It is about orientation. Are you loving from fullness or from lack? Are you sharing yourself or offering yourself up? Are you choosing intimacy or hoping it will choose you? Men instinctively feel the answer, and the women they remember for a lifetime are not those who tried to hold on, but those who trusted themselves enough to let go. Because in that trust lies the deepest form of attraction, authenticity without attachment. That is the energy that lingers. That is the presence that echoes. That is the woman who is never truly forgotten, not because she gave everything, but because she kept herself.